Welcome to another edition to What Keeps You Up at Night, the life of a rural entrepreneur. Today we are joined by Hayden Maass from Bornea Dynamics. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
First of all, tell me what Bornea Dynamics is and what do you do?
Yeah, of course. So we're a defense and law enforcement focused research and development contractor. Effectively, what we do is when a government agency in that space has a challenge that they want a technology to solve, we step in and do the engineering work to create the solution and build it for them.
How did you become interested in that?
I've always had an interest in the space industry. As I've grown up, I've watched companies like SpaceX go from practically nothing to developing a functional and quite exceptional vehicle to take platforms to space. So at a university, I always wanted to get into that in some way. Unfortunately, the space industry, particularly in Canada, requires massive upfront investment that wasn't available. So I just started to look at the industry. What might I be able to do to get a start there? And the defense R&D space came up, much lower capital requirements. So we started to bid on some stuff, on some contracts. We were able to secure something with the RCMP and have just grown it from there.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, if you can reveal, so you said the RCMP, is that your biggest client? Do you have some other clients that you can share with us, or is there a degree of security involved?
Not so much a security classification like that. They're generally just a bit particular on what's said publicly. But yeah, the Canadian government in the research and development space isn't actually a huge customer of us. Most of the work we do is for the United Kingdom, but similar in capacity.
Why is that? So are you doing the research and development on products or services or software, or what are you doing the research on?
Sometimes we would call it a widget. Usually what we work on is robotics platforms for whatever application they might have. So they'll come to us and say, we want to be able to have this device that can pick up this object, or say there's a field that's filled with mines. This isn't something we're working on, but just an example. There's a minefield that they want to clear. They'll say, we want to be able to do this with a robot autonomously. We don't want to have to send people or the mine clearing dogs or something like that into the field. So we'll design and build a technology that's able to do that, and then deliver it to them, and they use it for whatever they might need to.
What have you found to be the biggest roadblocks for you, or what area have been the biggest roadblock?
There's been a few serious challenges. I think the way in which government business is won is quite different from business to business transactions or consumer sales. You're often found targeting individual large opportunities. So the math and the decision-making process that goes into picking which opportunities to target, and maybe getting access to some background information that'll help you make that decision, has been difficult. As we've gotten bigger, it's got easier because we're more integrated, I'll say, in the space. But I think figuring out that process and doing it effectively has been and continues to be a big challenge.
Do you have to hire people to do intel for you? Like, do you have to get people to actually do the research into who's competing for contracts and things like that?
We haven't yet, but that's definitely in the cards.
Who's had the greatest influence on you in your entrepreneurial journey?
That's a great question. I think my parents own a small business, and I think watching them run the business and learn how to do it and run it day to day has probably been the biggest influence.
Was there anyone who thought you couldn't do it, or kind of discouraged you from not doing it on your own, being an entrepreneur?
Not really. There's always, it's a bit of a tougher route The success probabilities are relatively low, particularly in government business for somebody that hasn't worked for government before, like myself. But, generally the people around me have been very supportive.
How is doing business in a rural or smaller community different than being in an urban center?
For us, the biggest challenge is employees and recruiting, particularly for some of the niche or industry specific engineering roles. There might only be companies now that employ those people, in parts of the GTA, in Ottawa, Montreal, Quebec City, and obviously some places in the US. So finding people that are able to fill those roles that are local to us if they need to work in person is definitely tricky. We've been fortunate for ourselves, unfortunately for the American industry, but a lot of people that go to school in Canada will move to the US to work for a startup or whatever, in a highly specialized engineering role. And a lot of those people, for whatever reason, have been coming back to Canada in the last 2 years, maybe. So we've gotten some great talent that way. But generally recruiting is tricky.
Walk me through when you made your first hire. It's one thing to be an entrepreneur and be doing it on your own and taking care of your own bills and worrying about, keeping the lights on or paying for your own hydro in your own home, or versus, being responsible for other people. So how did you start hiring people, and how did you get over that hurdle of that huge responsibility?
Having employees was a very unanticipated stress for me. Before doing it, it's not something I thought that would be stressful at all. And in retrospect, it's probably the thing that stresses me out the most. Not because anybody is challenging or difficult or anything like that, just because it's a pretty substantial responsibility. So my first employee, I was introduced to him through another colleague that I had worked with before. And he's worked here for 2 years now and done a great job. But yeah, it can be stressful for sure.
Are there any parts of the business that are stressful? I imagine that you need to give very high-powered executive presentations at some points. Is that nerve-wracking too, or are you getting used to that?
It can still be a bit nerve-wracking. I've always enjoyed the public speaking or the presentation aspect, but at the beginning I was quite nervous. I feel like I've gotten better and better at it as I go, and I'm sure I will as we keep going. But yeah, that was a bit of a learning curve.
Is it difficult to explain what you do? I mean, many of us in the summertime go to barbecues at friends' house or family, and inevitably people, kind of ask, what do you do? Do you find it difficult to explain that to people?
Extremely, yes. I mean, I'll come home for the holidays in a month and a bit. And this has happened for a couple of years now, but I'll get all the questions. Oh, what are you working on? What are you doing? I say, oh, we're doing research and development for defense. And everybody goes, what are you doing? What do you mean? And it's really difficult to understand, particularly because we're not allowed to give out specifics. So I can't say, we're doing this for this project for this customer. I just have to explain it broad strokes. I think that makes it even worse. But yeah, definitely difficult to explain.
Yeah, there must be a lot of security involved with that. So even your family, perhaps you can't give certain details. How much pressure is that, holding on to all of that information on your own and having to hold that in your head yourself?
I mean, having employees, it's relatively easy. Each contract has a different level of security applied to it. With the most sensitive materials having the most security protocols applied. I usually go with the approach where if it has some sort of security applied, regardless of what level it is, we just don't talk about it outside of the workplace. Fortunately, having other employees that work on the same project, we're able to talk and discuss it amongst ourselves. So it's not like you're confined to, silence on any of the projects. I mean, there's lots of other people that do work on it. So it's been all right.
What about mentorship? I mean, when you're in a field that is new and there's innovation, do you even have mentors that you can ask questions of, and people that have perhaps walked in your shoes previously?
There's a few people that I have chatted with, particularly that have done business in the U.S. on a couple cases. ERP systems for defense are complicated. Tracking all of the resource time and contributions and cost allocations versus what we deliver on projects when it's project based is pretty tricky. For things like that, I've been fortunate enough to have made some connections in the U.S. But in terms of people that have experience targeting the Canadian market, not really. That's something I've just kind of figured out as we've went.
Is there anything that you would have done had you not been doing this? And I mean, did you always want to do this? Or was there some other career that maybe when you were little or maybe when you were in high school, you thought you would be doing and now you're doing something completely different?
I always had the pipe dream of being an astronaut. But more realistically, I think I did always want to have my own business. The fact that it was doing research and development for defense ministries in Canada and the UK is probably not what I would have guessed when I was in high school. But I'm very happy it's turned out this way.
What keeps you up at night? What are the things that run through your head when you're trying to get to sleep? What are the things that you're thinking about?
Yeah. So for a bit of background, almost all of my job is sales, the sales side of the business. The thing that I think about the most, and particularly after I've made a decision, is which opportunities to target. In government procurement, most of the purchasing is publicly released, or the request for proposals documents you can just download off the internet. So it's easy enough in a lot of cases to get access to the information on those opportunities, but picking the right ones, understanding whether we're qualified to do it, if we're what they're looking for, if we're not what they're looking for, and what the win probability might be is the thing I think about the most.
That's really complex. There's a large complexity to that. I mean, do you mentor anyone to help you do that job, or are you the only person right now who is doing the sales?
I have a proposal manager who she helps me write the bids and helps with a bit of the decision making there. So not alone.
Before we started, we were talking about growing up in a small town. I also grew up in a small town. When you go back and during the holidays or the summertime, are people surprised at what you're doing?
Sometimes. A few of my friends from high school have gone into the industry as well. And they're pretty well versed in the space, but those that haven't, I think it's a bit surprising.
If you had the chance to tell your younger self something, give yourself some advice, maybe your 18-year-old self, what would you tell him?
I know I wouldn't listen to it. I don't know if I have anything. I think regardless of the path that got here, I think it's worked out for the best. So yeah, I don't think I do have any advice.
Is that your philosophy with entrepreneurship, that it's all part of growth, all part of learning, all part of a journey?
I think so. What I've tried not to do with the company is fit us too tightly into a box, which causes problems when somebody asks what we do, because it's a 4-page essay answer to the work that we do. But I think as long as there's some room or some flexibility, and yeah, we could try that. Oh, that might be a good idea. We're going to take a stab at it and see what happens. I think that's the best way to keep the company relevant, right? To grow into something that's effective and a great business doing stuff for governments, but also the ability to still be doing that in 10 years. I think it's very important.
Was there a benchmark when you started that you wanted to achieve, meaning, a $10 million contract, or, was there anything in your mind that you wanted to achieve or get or work for or customer that you've knocked off that list?
Yeah. I think originally starting my goal was to win a contract, maybe $100,000 with a big federal agency here in Canada. A lesson from the first contract that we had was a $150,000 contract. And to me, just graduated university student at the time, that was infinity money. The accounting for where that would go just did not compute. But the contract took 6 months, and we spent all of the money. I very quickly learned, regardless of how big the deal is or the contract is or the work that you're doing, there's always something that's larger, and it's always something that's going to cost more.
Do you think that you have a good work-life balance? Or is that important?
Right now, not really. This tends to be the busy season, particularly for the sales process. But I'm fortunate enough that my partner also works with me here, and she's very, very kind about it. So maybe in a couple of years, I'll have a happier answer to that. But no, I love doing it. So yeah.
What's your advice to somebody who perhaps is also in university and has an incredibly innovative idea, a little nervous though, no cash? What's your advice to them?
Just start working on it. I think the most learning that I've done in this industry and in businesses general doesn't come from researching or planning or preparing to do something. It comes from actually trying to do something. Because inevitably you screw it up, you make a mistake, but you learn from that. And that's by far been the biggest for me.
Is there anything else you'd like to add? Anything I didn't ask you that you'd like to talk about in relation to your business or yourself?
No, I don't think so. I think we covered it.
Awesome.